Hello, you're listening to Designing the Revolution. This is chapter 28, The Revolution, part 1. Okay, so here we are. After 27 chapters, we finally arrived at the moment of truth, which is the ins and outs of the actual revolution itself, as it were, the episode that changes the regime. So, just to clarify, that is the definition. We decided on this definition to give some sort of structure to the project. At the beginning of this podcast, we're defining a revolution as a change of regime, not a change of government, not the disappearance of the state. It's a change in the constitution, the way in which the state is organised, as it were. Okay, so maybe some people skip straight to this episode because this is the actual final battle, as you might say. But the reason I've done these 27 episodes before we get to this point is to try and explain that successful design is all about the micro details, all about the sociability dynamics, all about understanding why assemblies work and all the rest of it that I've been going on about. And I was listening to a podcast myself actually last night about the Roman Empire, and they were saying look, the battles weren't that important. That was tactics. The reason why the Romans won was because of logistics. In other words, it's those 27 chapters which are going to show you basically how it's going to be a done deal when it comes to the main day, as you might say. All right. So the other thing to make clear or reiterate here is that the moment of revolution, the moment at which a regime falls and a new regime takes place is the battle, and you come in the battle but lose the war. In other words, there's the build-up period, which is what I've just talked about, but there's also the afterwards. And success here, this is really important, success does not mean having a revolution. Success means having a revolution that remains successful. So there's a tension here because obviously the moment of revolution is important, right? There's no doubt about that. And at the same time, you have to keep constantly in mind that there's the run up to it and there's what happens next to it. And there's this continuity. And as professional designers, as it were, then we're looking at the whole system. All right. So I'm going to go through, broadly speaking, the year before this revolutionary episode happens. So I'm going to do this in part 1, and in part 2, I'm going to look at the final month and the final week. And I'm going to utilise a bunch of tools, processes, frames, which, come out of the preparation we've done. And this strategy is being worked on. It's not abstract. It's being worked on by various groups in various countries, particularly in Western societies. And I'm going to put an email at the end. So if you watch this or listen to this episode and you're thinking, great, I want to do this, then please don't just, do nothing. Email me and I can put you in touch with groups and projects that are collectively trying to evolve the different main models, right? Because this isn't, as we all know, it's not do A, do B, and you'll get C, right? There's A, B, C, D, E, F, and you mess about with them all and you shake a dice or two, and then you come up with success or not, as the case may be. All right, but I am going to be referring to a number of problems which are emerging already in this pre-revolutionary period in 2023 as we go into 2024. Because it's not easy, right? It's, you're making history here, you're pioneering. So yeah, we have a bunch of tools and processes, but it's certainly yet to be worked out that one works better than that one. So I'm going to go through, a number of scenarios, but it's in that ballpark. All right. So broadly speaking, as we've discussed before, there's two broad outcomes here, broad processes. The first process is that a synergy between political activities and social movements and assemblies comes together. And the pre-revolutionary context is such that it's not going to collapse in and of that moment of its own accord, but it's highly stressed, it's highly fractured, it's very vulnerable underneath the, pretense of total control, as it were. And what these forces, as they go into battle, as you might say, they push it over. So it's a proactive strategy. If this mobilisation hadn't happened, then the pre-revolutionary period would go on for a longer period. And as we're all aware, this is not an insignificant issue in the sense that we only have a few years to prevent all the tipping points from, finally meaning the human race is going to go extinct or effectively extinct or whatever horrors we're going to have. In other words, we have a time limit here, which makes it unique in the human experience, right? Previous revolutions, if the revolution doesn't happen this year, well, that's pretty bad. We'll do it again in 5 years' time. That's not the case. So this is why this whole, all these episodes have been pushing towards this idea. We have to push this. We can't just sit for the inevitable collapse of capitalism, as you might say. But talking of which, the other scenario is there is a major rupture. There's a big climate 9/11 ecological disaster type thing, or that combines or is triggered by some social collapse scenario. In other words, we make this preparation for this revolutionary period, but events actually happen and they propel us, as you might say, into a revolutionary moment. So it could be one, it could be the other, and it's not particularly important to speculate which will happen, because the most important thing is that we prepare, and the preparation is the same whether it's going to be a rupture scenario or whether it's going to be a proactive scenario. It doesn't matter. What matters most is that we prepare for both, and that consists of the same preparation work that we've been doing over these previous episodes. All right, so before I get into the main point of all this, the last thing to say, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again, right? People will be watching this and they'll be going, we're all encultured, we're all brainwashed or socialised into thinking revolutions are really difficult. Oh, this is great, Roger, but revolutions, they're just really difficult. They're not going to happen. That's bollocks. It's total bullshit, right? Revolutions happen all the time. Historically, every 30, 50, 70 years in Western societies. Sometimes over and over again, sometimes over a period of 20 years, sometimes over 1 year. History is just a shit show, right, of war, disease, revolution. That's what it is. And yes, you have periods of stability, and we've had this big period of stability for the last 30 years. But as we know, when we've studied the elites haven't changed. They're still totally incompetent and stupid, and they are going to collapse, like all elites collapse. So that doesn't mean it's a, done deal. But what it means is we have to be realistic. And if we're being realistic, we can't be idealistic, but we can't be cynical. We need to say, yeah, this system is done, and it might be done next year, or it might be done in 3 years or 10 years, who knows. But it's coming, and we need to prepare for it. All right. So there we are. Let's see how all this is brought together. So at this point, I need to, concretize. I don't want to talk in abstractions. Most people, as we all know, when it comes to revolutionary episodes, they talk in these abstractions about capitalism and blah, blah, blah. That's not going to help us. But if we concretize things, it also means to a certain extent we need to oversimplify. So as I go through this, you need to be aware of thinking, it might be more complicated than that. But in order to get somewhere and get some understanding, We need to use categories and dynamics and simplify what might happen. So this is what I call like mid-level design. We know we're not talking about the top level, capitalism does this, capitalism does that, but we're not looking at the micro level either, where you put the biscuits in the assembly and all that stuff. We're talking about what are the major social formations and how do they interact in order to bring about this pivot moment where you change from one regime to another. All right, so different people around the Western world, as I have just said, are working on this. And I'm going to take what some people have come up with and I've contributed to, which is to think about 4 different elements. So think about this as going into battle and you've got your 4 armies, right? You've got your four elements and they're going in towards the elites. And I'm going to go through them and then I'm going to say how they interact. And it's how they interact, right, which is important. Think about, the strategy of a battle. Yeah, you've got your 4 armies, but it's what you do with them, right? It's how the generals move them around and go and all that stuff. All right. So the first one is something, many of you watching this video know about, right? Which is civil resistance. Civil resistance. We've talked about it lots, but just to reiterate, civil resistance is the process of creating peaceful social disruption, non-cooperation or active disruption. And what it does is captures attention, it galvanizes the debate, it provides a trigger to create recruitment, it polarizes, it has a danger of being over-polarizing, it can become stranded, as it were, if it's not connected with other social formations. Okay, but it's an essential element, right? Without disruption, you don't get the drama. It's the thing that animates the system. Okay. So then we have assemblies. You've just done four episodes on the assemblies. So what we know is this is what gives the solidity to the revolutionary project. Yeah, you've got the civil resistance, you've got the street movement, but where do ordinary people fit into this? Where do you create a mass movement? Where do you create this upsurgence of democratic confidence, democratic know-how and confidence? Okay, so what you do is you have these assemblies, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. All right, so the thing to say at this point is this is the classical last year, last few months of a pre-revolutionary period, is where you have this alternative institutionalization through assemblies that aggregate, let's say, into a national assembly, and then you have the street movement, you have the civil resistance. And you see this in all the classical revolutionary theory and all the classical revolutionary case studies. So in the English Revolution, you have the Parliament, and then you have the mobilisation for the Civil War. In those days, they always used to have wars rather than civil resistance, right? But you can see the two things going together. The army defended the Parliament, and the Parliament gave solidity to the notion of the people's will. In the Russian Revolution, you had the Soviets or the Duma, and then you had the big street protest, big marches. The two supported each other. You couldn't get rid of the Soviets because if you did, people would come out onto the street. The people on the street didn't really know what was happening and what they wanted. It was all very confused, but it was actualized and aggregated, the common will, the collective will, as you might say, through the Soviets. This is what we want, land, peace and all the rest of it. In the French Revolution, you had the Estates General and then various other iterations of an alternative institution, and the king or the aristocracy would try and get rid of them every now and again, and you had this backwards and forwards movement over 2 or 3 years where they get rid of the institution or try to, and then it would go through Paris and everyone would come out on the streets and they protect their institution, right? So there's a really common pattern here, and the central strategic takeaway point is that you have to have both, right? You have to have both. And we've seen, we'll look at some sort of half successful examples over the later neoliberal period, the last 10 years. And we can see in these examples how they half got it right, like in Iceland, they brought down the government, but they didn't maintain a street movement. And when the institution, wanting the new constitution, went to Parliament, then they were outmanoeuvred by the elites. And the institution, the assembly to create the new constitution, had no real power because they'd been outmanoeuvred because the street movement had gone home, as you might say. All right. So, this is the broad battle plan. But what we've been discussing in various groups in terms of this strategy is including two other more embellishing elements. So you can see this, you've got the main attack, as it were, and then you've got these flank movements, these elements which could actually be major elements, but they're critical add-ons, right? If you think about a traditional battle, the two main forces, they go like this, and then it's really what happens on the flank which decides the battle. But obviously you have to have these people going head to head. But once you've got them going to head, the street movement and the assemblies, what else is going on? So what else is going on is culture. So culture, this is the third element. Culture is really interesting, and it works on various levels because it's quite an abstract word, isn't it? So let's concretize it. On one level, what it means is cultural figures. So what we find in the run-up towards a revolutionary period is that politics and the phrase politics has become discredited. So lots of people are saying, I'm fed up, I hate political parties, I hate politics. And this is often misunderstood as apathy, resignation, all this. No, what it is suppressed rage against the political system, because the political system has become consolidated into one elite strategy. There isn't pluralism. There's no genuine pluralism. You can't nationalise the railways in the UK, even though everyone wants it, because there's this big consensus between the two big parties and all the rest of it, right? So what happens in pre-revolutionary periods is it's cultural change, or what is called cultural change, or cultural figures that initiate this revolutionary period and become the symbols of it and the promoters of it. But of course, when they're called cultural because they're outside the political system, but obviously, objectively, this is a massively political move. So when Gary Lineker, for instance, goes in against the BBC, he's a cultural figure, but it's profoundly political what he's doing, which is, he's standing up for refugees or whatever. But the reason he's politically successful is because he's outside the political system. So this is one key element of why culture is so important. So there's a famous example in Czechoslovakia in 1989. All the intellectuals and artists, they'd all been excluded from the system, and they were window cleaners and all this sort of thing. And then when the revolutionary period happened, they came to the fore. So they were the people who were talking to people, on the balcony, and people were singing songs, and some famous singer who'd never been allowed to sing for 20 years. And this is what created the emotionality, the sociability that brought about the courage to actually do the revolutionary street movement, and the street movement supporting, the alternative institutionalization. All right. So this is really important to understand. The cultural element is not the cultural element, right? The cultural element is the key political element that overcomes politics as people commonly understand it. The other thing that cultural figures do, particularly in the present context, of course, is they can amplify, right? They can amplify. They've got big social media presence. So the political system thinks it controls, the elite system as it presently exists, thinks it controls the public sphere. What they don't realise is the public sphere is not the public sphere. The public sphere is this narrow Westminster system in the UK. But outside it, there's people doing, YouTube videos on how to put lipstick on. And you think, oh, that's irrelevant. It's not irrelevant at all, because in a pre-revolutionary period, the woman showing you how to put lipstick on is going to say at the end of her her podcast or YouTube video, she can, in the pre-revolutionary period, she's going to talk to her mate and go, oh yeah, the lipsticks, we've done the lipstick, but everything's shit at the moment, isn't it? And suddenly, there starts to be this sort of cultural conversation, which is actually very political. And in other words, people are validated. People start to think, oh, these cultural figures that I respect and they're cool, they're on our side. And you start to get this amplification of first of all, of a common understanding that we're all pissed off, right? And then the second element is we're all pissed off and this needs to happen. You know, here I put the lipstick on and now we're going to go to the assembly. Does everyone know about the assembly? You know, it's like, this is cool, you should go to it. You know, it's that sort of thing. And then lastly, of course, these people have money. So it's not the foundations, you know, it's not the big political parties, it's not the corporate class, it's not the charities. They're all relevant, they're part of the system. Revolutions are created by eccentric rich people who support the revolutionary period. In other words, cultural figures who are independent of the system, are not tied in. So everyone who's tied into the system, you know, the democracy industry, for instance, you know, they're not going to support anything because they're going to lose their contracts, or there's the fear that they're going to lose their contracts. The people who are going to support the revolution are going to be people that made a load of money. They're self-made, paradoxically, from the neoliberal system. And now they're 40, 50, 60. They don't give a shit anymore. You know, they've got 20 more years of life. They want to do something important. They want to give money to a revolutionary episode because they're not dumb. They know that that's the only way change happens. So you've got this cultural element. So I'm going on about this, but it's quite important. You've got this cultural element, you know, in terms of the top level people. But then you've got like the bottom level, which is having the parties, right? The sociability element, which we've talked about in previous episodes, right? So, you know, you're putting on an award ceremony for the best local people who've been nominated by other local people. You're having a party and then people going around and signing up to do leafleting, or, you know, go to an assembly and what have you. You're having a carnival along the streets. You're having a gig, you're having a music event, you're having a rave, right? You're having a festival. But all these things, instead of just being separated off from the political space, they are now integrated into it, which I'll talk more about in a sec. So that's the culture, right? So we've got civil resistance, you know, civil disobedience, public action. We've got assemblies, alternative institutionalization. We've got the culture. What else? The last thing is standing elections. So this causes lots of confusion, right? Because, you know, our cultural trigger when we say elections is, oh, that means political party. Oh, that means like the Labour Party, or that means like the conventional parties. If you're listening to this from other countries, you know, oh, that's the system. Oh God, Rogers, you know, he's telling us to, you know, join the system. Everything's going to get corrupted. Quite possibly, right? Quite possibly, but not necessarily. And this depends on mid-level design. So historically, there's two elements of mid-level design which don't lead to appropriation. The first one is standing elections as a direct action, right? So let's get out of this, you know, neoliberal categorization, anchoring. You know, politics is pursuing the neoliberal system. No, it doesn't have to, right? You can stand in the election and, you know, walk around the streets with no clothes on and tell people, you know, God's coming to save us. You can do whatever you like. Standing in an election is simply a bureaucratic act. How you create cultural meaning afterwards entirely up to you. So, you know, you've got the monster raving loony party in the UK. They're not getting appropriated, not particularly useful either. But you can see, if you've been clever about it, and say, okay, we can stand as a direct action. We're going to disrupt. We're going to put, you know, leaflets out. You know, these get subsidised by the state. We're going to get loads of publicity for this general revolutionary project. We're going to have a glorious failure. It doesn't matter, because you're getting your word out there. The other strategy is things come through the assembly and you get these tipping points, and you get a genuine community candidate standing in a constituency in the UK, or, you know, where you've got proportional representation. You start getting some sort of traction, right? Because you're speaking the truth, and you've got these assemblies around the country, and you've got these cultural figures supporting you and all the rest of it. And the people who stand in the elections are are standing for the assemblies. I'll talk about this more, or are disciplined, right? They're in a disciplined space. So, we can see this historically, for instance, like with communist MPs, arguably they did get appropriated by the system, but also arguably they didn't. They were there for a revolutionary episode, and they had a clear ideology and a clear discipline, and that had pros and cons. But the point is, you don't need to. Appropriation isn't inevitable, and in so much as it's not, then you have another army on the field, right? You've got the people in the system. They talk to ministers, they talk to civil servants, they talk to the police, they find out what's going on. So this is really important. So you've got an insider strategy, as they call it, and you've got the outsider strategy, and it's the two together that synergize and point you towards success. So this is the final point about this, which is that each of these things, as I do talks about this around the country at the moment, what gets people excited is when I say that each of these items, right, everyone knows what they all look like, and they're all boring, right, from a cynical or even realistic point of view. It's like, we've tried direct action, we put people up as candidates in the Green Party, it doesn't. No, what's interesting here is two things. Number one is the close interaction between these different elements. So again, looking at the battlefield sort of analogy, and by the way, I'm just looking at that as a system, right? I'm not interested in the whole violence thing, or what I'm looking at is a game, right? In a game, you've now got four elements on the field of play. And you've got four elements, it's obviously better than having two. If you've only got two elements, maybe you're just not going to get to the tipping point. If you've got three, maybe. If you've got four, you've got 50-50 chance, right? So what's interesting here is the myriad ways in which these four different elements move together. And no one quite knows. We've got some hunches about how to do this, particularly with the street movement and the assemblies. But there's probably other moves. And the point is we pivot, right? So these elements are going into battle, and they're going to support each other and stop them getting isolated. And you're going to have this strategic leadership, right, which is sort of moving them around, as you might say. So there's an analogy here with, I've spoken to this in previous episodes, with the A22 network, which is just a civil resistance network or organisation, which has created some of the most successful civil resistance episodes in the Western world. Why has this been successful? Because there's four elements, right? So four different elements. And if you want to join the network, you have to do those four elements. And if you just do two of them, it doesn't really work. But if you do three, maybe you're in the ballpark. If you do four, you've got 60-70% chance of becoming, the most significant climate civil disobedience project in your country. That's exciting, right? Because this is what design's all about. It's going, this is what logistics is all about with the Romans. It's like, if you get all your preparations sorted out, if you do your design properly, then you're more or less certain to win, because we've done it before. You replicate it. And particularly around the Western world, it's arguable whether this is the case in other places, it's a separate discussion. But around the Western world, broadly speaking, all the societies are much of a muchness. There's massive alienation from the neoliberal elite, there's austerity, there's, loads of other tensions, there's massive inequality, and there's democratic traditions which enable you to create these iterations. All right. So there you are. Those are the, that's going into battle, as it were. Okay, so I'm going to give a battle plan to continue this rather, tricky analogy, but let's look at the battle plan. So I'm going to give you one battle plan, and then I'm going to give a few subplots on it, right? So what some of us in the UK are doing and in other countries, we've designed this plan. Yeah, it may work, it may need altering, it may be rubbish, but it's our best bet at the moment. So what we do is we create 50 assemblies, local assemblies around the country. And I've already discussed the details, so I'm not going to talk to you about how you set them up and all the rest of it. You can look at the previous episodes for that. So these 50 assemblies, at the end of them, there's pathways to action, right? 4 people write up a report. You do videos, short videos of people saying what they thought about what needs to happen in society. And 4 or 5 of those people, for the sake of argument, are delegated to go to a national assembly, or maybe it's a city assembly. So it's an aggregate assembly. So let's do it on the national scale. So the National Assembly is held, and that takes, defined and formal inputs. It's not symbolic, it's real. You've got these inputs, the written inputs, the video inputs. You've got the people coming, and they deliberate. Ordinary people are deliberating on the future of the country, right? That's the general theme, within the context of the cost of living crisis, within the context of the Death Project, by putting carbon into the atmosphere and all this stuff. And what they're going to come out with is practical bread and butter, like things that need to be done, right? The priorities, whether that's free public transport, better well-insulated housing, promotion of renewable energy, taxation of the rich, dum bum bum. I mean, these things are all fairly obvious. But the point is they all come out through this process. And so they're not coming out with something abstract, like we need to reduce carbon. They're coming out with the frontline social policies that deal with all these different elements together, because all these elements are fundamentally the same intersecting system. Okay. And, there's cultural elements in this. There's, cultural figures at this big assembly. There's workshops. There's, a gig, there's a rave, all this sort of stuff. Footballers shake people's hands. It's always my big thing when people come into the National Assembly. I'm going to go and see 1 or 2 footballers in the next few weeks, dare I say it. Anyway, so, and then, this is a sort of linear system, but we're going to embellish it in a minute. So you do the local assemblies, got the National Assembly, come out with a pledge card. These are the 5 things that people of Britain, of your country, want. There's media on it. The right-wing media say this is outrageous, this isn't democracy, and all the stuff that they're going to make up about it. That's great, because the right-wing media will amplify the message, because then everyone will start talking about it. The right-wing media will make that structural mistake they always make at the present moment in pre-revolutionary periods. They think they're arrogant enough to think that everyone's going to agree with them, but then people are going to look and go, actually, that assembly's great. Thank you very much, Daily Mail, for letting me know about it. Actually, those guys are great, because someone's come out and they're an electrician and they're saying, I used to be against assemblies, but now this is actually great, got a voice at last, fuck off, Daily Mail. It's like, this is it. So you get this amplification, and then you get the moment of confrontation with the regime, because it's going, hang on a minute, we represent the people of the UK. This is what we want. We want these 5 things. You're saying no, no, no. Okay, we're going to have a demonstration in London, in the capital city or in regional cities. We're going to stop paying taxes. We're going to sit down until we get our top 3 things, discussed in Parliament, or variations on the theme. In other words, this is when the direct action system comes in. All right, so you can see that as the main thrust, and it's good enough to go as the main thrust, let's say. But it's not the main thrust that's going to win. It's going to be all the subplots, the different elements around it. So I'm going to do 2 subplots, or 2 flank attacks, to use the other analogy. So the first one is like the dynamo in these local assemblies. So again, watch the previous episodes for more details about this. But what we're looking at is these assemblies going, and actually the local council is rubbish as well. And we're going to go and occupy the council offices, or we're going to have a demonstration, we're going to have a campaign on housing, on sewerage, or, whatever is sort of doing people's heads in. So then you're creating this culture of people taking direct action. So when the National Assembly is rebutted by the regime, it's like you've got 100 different assemblies around the country that have some experience of doing civil disobedience. Okay. So it's like, they're battle hardened, as it were. They know how to do it. They know how to do affinity groups. They know how to do, legal briefings. They know how to do post-arrest support. So you've got this growing culture of people going, yeah, right, we occupied Hull County Council because they wouldn't, do anything on
water pollution. We won there. Now we're going to go down to London because we want free public transport in the UK because, it's the only way we're going to get people out of cars and all the rest of it. So that's one subplot. The other subplot, obviously, is the local elections, right? So standing in the local elections, that gives people, again, confidence to then start standing in the national elections. It gives people an insider knowledge about how lobbying works, how the corruption works, how the inside of government works, so that when you're actually, after the revolution, as it were, you already know how the system works. Can't be underestimated in terms of how important it is, because, as we've discussed several times, the Tahrir Square scenario is, you've got this massive street movement and they sort of win, and then no one knows what to do because no one knows how to do what they want to do. Well, if you've got this, like with the Labour movement in the early 20th century, they've had local councillors 20 years, they've had a few MPs. They understand how it works. Yes, you've got the danger of appropriation. We're going to talk about that a bit more in a minute. But it's another big element, right, in your four armies. So your four armies, they're not just armies, they actually have specialisms, right, in terms of this holistic plan to appropriate the public space and to remove the regime and to create a new regime without it all being a big shit show, civil war or chaos, which no one wants, right? We're not talking about chaos here. We're talking about revolution, which functionally moves into a new regime. And yes, this is difficult and it could create chaos and all the rest of it. But there is chaos and chaos, right? And you can minimize chaos by having this really smart logistical strategy. Okay. All right. So we're going to be going on for, going on for a little while. Okay. Let me just check. We're all right. Okay. So let's just, take a slight tangent here. Just for those of you who are thinking, this isn't really going to work. It's already worked partially, right? And as we understand when we study complexity theory, and we talked about this loads, okay, haven't we? Where we're going, in complexity theory, you fail, you half fail, you half fail, you half fail, and then you win. And the only reason you win is because you totally failed, and then you half failed, you half failed, and you half failed, and then you won. So failure is part of the system. It's part of the logistics. It's part of the subplot. It's part of the preparation for the win. Because you're never going to know how to win unless you've half failed. So this is why it's instructive to look at what you might call half failures or half wins. And I'm just going to quickly look at, 4 of them. And you might want to read books on them because the devil's in the detail here, okay? So it's really interesting to study these recent case studies. So the first one is Syriza. We've talked about this before. A Marxist party, it didn't want to reconcile it with the whole meta-framing of the neoliberal period. It was saying, we're Marxists, we want to have a revolution, we want to get rid of capitalism, we're not having anything to do with it. And the unintended consequence of this was when there was a genuine objective crisis, debt crisis in 2014, I think it was around then. The reason why they were propelled into greatness, I mean literally, because they weren't, dare I say it, that smart in terms of the mobilisation and strategy. They were propelled into greatness because they weren't part of the system, right? This comes back to this thing I've said before, when you're knocking on the door, the main line is we're not them, right? People look at, it doesn't matter what you are, which is why fascism is so successful. It's like, fascism is not them. Great, let's vote fascist. People vote fascist not because they're fascists, it's because fascists aren't them, which is the system that has, destroyed our communities and destroyed our sense of well-being and all the rest of it, right? So what's interesting about that is what we can learn from this is the assembly movement, maybe it will only get 4% of the vote like Syriza, but it doesn't matter because they're waiting for the moment of rupture. And as we've discussed, when the moment of rupture comes, there'll be 1,000 people in the assembly meetings going, we want to do this, we want to do this. And the great thing is you'll be prepared, unlike Syriza, arguably, to actually, have the strategic leadership to take control of the state, which obviously happened to Syriza. But Syriza didn't do assemblies, they didn't have a
a revolutionary strategy, and they basically ended up, crumbling under the weight of the assault from, the neoliberal EU situation. You can read about it. So second, we've got Podemos. With Podemos, what's interesting is, you had the street movement, sounds good. Then you had the political party, sounds good. So you've got your two armies, right? And then, again, they moved into power, but they didn't interact. We'll talk about this more in the revolution after the revolution episodes that are coming down, after this talk. So they got semi-appropriated, right? But what is good about this half failure is they got 30%, support from the country. Well, that's not bad because they did it in about a year. So it's went from 4% to 40%. In other words, what these case studies show us is in Western societies, there is a massive desire for something different. And if you can get your shit together and you show people, hey, this is different and it's organised and you have a programme and all the rest of it, and you've got all these different elements, suddenly you have this big whoosh effect, which is, oh my God, maybe these are the people who are going to get us out of this, neoliberal prison and all the rest of it. All right. So the third one, which is very similar, of course, to Podemos is Corbyn. So Corbyn has the subplot of the whole anti-Semitic sort of thing, and you can look at it. And many people, watching this will be familiar with this example. 500,000 people join the Labour Party. There's a semi sort of organised move towards, local assembly, local community activism. But it doesn't really get off the ground because the big problem with the Corbyn project is it takes place within the meta frame and meta organisational logic of a Labour Party that has no interest in revolutionary change, no interest in participatory politics, right? It's a sort of reformist, Stalinist state, if that's not too much of a contradiction, Stalinist organisation where one sector, one element, either the left or the right, gets control, and then there's this culture of getting rid of people rather than having pluralism. And as many people will be familiar, that's basically what's happened since Corbyn has got chucked out and all the rest of it. Okay, and then we've got the Macron example in France. Now, what's interesting about the Macron example, obviously, you're probably sitting there going, well, that's nothing to do with revolution. That's not the point. Look at the dynamic, right? A lot of discontent. The new model can come from the right, it can come from the centre, it can come from the left. It's the model that we're looking at here. The model was, someone told me, 5,000 people spoke to, tens of thousands of people. And the question was, what do you want the new France to look like? And so they got basically an idea of what they wanted the programme to be. But also, or potentially, they could have mobilised, and I think they did to a certain extent, mobilised those 50,000 people to go, OK, so let's put candidates up. And to a certain extent, they got non-political, candidates, ordinary people to stand, paradoxically, on a centrist sort of programme. And the point here is, again, this party went from 0 to, I don't know what percentage of vote, but they won the election, arguably within 6 months. Yes, arguably with a lot of banker money, But it's interesting, isn't it? That wouldn't have happened in the 1980s or something. So you've got 4 examples in 4 different Western countries of half failures using models of sort of insurrectionary sort of dynamics. Not in the violent sense of the word, but the sense of there's the system and we're doing something different and we benefit because we're out of the system, right? This is the critical point. It's like we're not the system and that's why we get elected. Well, in the good old days, in the reformist days, if you're outside the system, no one's going to be interested in you because everyone thinks everything's pretty much okay. In the pre-revolutionary paradigmic sort of social system, the logics are the opposite, which is if you're outside the system, that's actually good electorally for you, or it's good from a mobilisation point for you, because people are looking for that. Oh, you're not part of the system. Great, I'm going to vote for you. Oh, you're not part of the system. Oh, right, I'm going to the assembly. That's just ordinary people. Great. It's not dominated by the local council telling everyone they're going to do great stuff and then do nothing and all that, bollocks. Okay. All right, so you can see you've got this, we've got our armies, we're going to take them into battle, we've got the main scenario, we've got these little side plots, we can see these half
half successors, as it were. So this is starting to happen now, and I want to focus in the next 15 minutes on not pretending this is easy. Okay, we've talked. I've just talked about a reformist period and a pre-revolutionary period, and these are ideal types. In sociology, ideal types are like sort of perfect constructions, which actually in reality, obviously, it's a more messy. So we've said, and the ideal type of the reformist period is people just aren't interested in revolutionary change, like changing the regime. In the pre-revolutionary period, they are, but they're socially repressed. And in the revolutionary period, they're not socially repressed, and there's a revolution happening as a result. Now, the particular problem with the pre-revolutionary period is it's extremely difficult to calibrate the degree of social repression and when it's going to explode. So, for instance, if you look in individual psychology, someone's really annoyed. Yeah, they're really annoyed, but they don't want to say anything. That's easy. It's easy to identify that. You see that right across the Western world. You can see that in people's personal lives. And you say, that person's going to explode soon. But it's really difficult to tell, isn't it? It's like, someone's got an abusive partner or something. It's like, they've got to leave. They know they've got to leave. They could be with them again in 6 months' time, and everyone's going, oh my God, they've just got to do it. Or sometimes they just do it next week, and they don't know, and it's really difficult to predict because you've got this complex system going on, either in terms of their individual psychology or on the social level, all these different groups. So the conundrum here, in terms of design, is, okay, do you be purely revolutionary? We are a revolutionary party. We're revolutionary assemblies. And you're using that word. The benefit of using that word or similar words like that is clear. You put your cards on the table and you're inspiring people with your honesty and your fearlessness and your rhetoric. So you go into the assembly and say, guys, this is the situation. Dun, 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 dun. It's the situation. And in this assembly today, you can make decisions about it. And the hypothesis here is the subliminal message is we are giving you permission in this space to say what you really think, which is you're really pissed off. Okay, but there's a counter argument, which is you're basically like telling people what to do. So the devil's in the detail, right? So in other words, you shouldn't be standing up saying, you need to think this, right? This isn't top-down Leninist. You need to agree with, the end of capitalism. Otherwise, you're shits, and go into your small groups and discuss this, and you better come out with the right answer, right? Obviously, that's not that cool. But also, arguably, uncool is this liberal purist scenario where you go, we haven't got any opinions. You can just decide what you want. In other words, like the neoliberal system is in the room. This is the big problem with the liberal hypothesis, which is, it's a neutral space. No, it's not. Because unless you provide a space for people to actually identify and connect with their pissed offness and radicalness, then the subliminal thing is, particularly, if it's run by the council, for instance, it's like, we've just got to come up with shitty little ideas, about nicer bus stops or something. All right, so you can see this tension. Because at this moment of creating your assembly, you've got a decision to make about how much to frame and structure the space and how much not to. And of course, the solution probably is somewhere in between the two. And then the other problem is, okay, so let's say, so that's the design of the assembly. Okay. So let's say we don't interfere and we just say, okay, we're going to do assemblies, and then it goes to the National Assembly. And then the National Assembly comes up with these 5 points on a pledge card. And then the government says, no. How do you know that the people in those assemblies are going to automatically go into some sort of civil disobedience mode? There's a strong hypothesis which will say they won't, because they've got no culture of resistance. because they've been put there by, a lot of the assemblies have been organised by organisations that simply aren't going to encourage civil disobedience, because in a semi-authoritarian situation like the UK, everyone's scared stiff because they're going to lose their contract, they're going to lose their job, they're going to lose their connections, they're going to have it on their CV, it's going to be like checks when they're trying to get a new job. In other words, like, if you introduce the neoliberal administrative system, the local charities, the food banks, all these are full of people that have a charity logic, right? This is not a revolutionary logic, obviously. So there's a tension here, isn't there? Which is maybe 20% of that space actually wants to, is open to a progression that leads to system change. But 80% of the local community space is either going to be demoralised or charity-esque or locked into a neoliberal performative culture because they're scared of money and losing their power, or of course a combination of all three. All right, so arguably at the beginning of a pre-revolutionary period, it just isn't possible. You see what I mean? If you're revolutionary at the beginning, you frighten people off. If you're not revolutionary at the beginning, you get appropriated. In other words, objectively, it's just not going to happen. That's on the borderline of a reformist period and a pre-revolutionary period. And you don't know how much you're into the pre-revolutionary period, of course, until you try it. So it's possible in some places in the Western world at some points, at the present moment, it's just not going to happen. You just can't, the design isn't going to do the deal. You're going to lose whichever way you go. But of course, the whole of this series is predicated on the idea that's not the case. It is possible to have a little bit of a revolutionary framing. It is possible to have loads of assemblies. It is possible for people to come out and get pissed off and engage in civil disobedience. So we'll see, won't we? And no doubt there'll be a number of half failures along the way. Okay, so you can see the problem here, right? But we've got another card in our pack here, which is strategic and charismatic leadership. And this is what's massively missing in the whole horizontalist experience of the last 20 years. And one of the primary reasons why in this year before the revolution happens, right, this pre-revolutionary period, let's call it a year, where we're trying to build up the assemblies, political candidates, cultural events, all this sort of stuff. There has to be this vanguard element in the system which disciplines, organises and coordinates that system so that it doesn't all sludge into, at worst dysfunction and at best sort of disconnected sort of activism. What I mean by this is, I'll give you three critical examples. Let's say you're trying to design these assemblies, right? There's enormous potential for conflict, right? Because it's really difficult to know where the balance is. The role of leadership, particularly charismatic leadership here, is that for someone, and dare I say I did it this week, so it's on my mind, is to just say, okay, this is where the balance is going to be. Someone has a reasonable amount of authority or the core group's going, we don't know, but we're going to try this. But the fundamental thing is we've made a decision, right? We've made a decision to do something. Could be wrong. But the critical thing is to make the decision as opposed to just having endemic conflict and attritional sort of stress within the assembly system. This is how we're doing it. We might iterate on it. We might make a new decision. But at the moment, this is the standard model, right? The second purpose of charismatic leadership is to go, look, lots of people come into the space and they say, oh, this won't work because it will put people off. In other words, what left-wing activists do all the time, which drives me mad, and we've talked about this lots, is they regurgitate the neoliberal logic. So the Daily Mail or the right-wing press will say, oh, the activists are putting people off. And stupidly, the left-wing activists say, oh, you're putting people off. Empirically, maybe they are, maybe they're not. But the point is defeatism is just appallingly stupid because you're basically doing the ruling class's work for it, right? The main reason left-wing projects fail isn't because of the right wing, it's because the left wing people are just so miserable and cynical and, conflictorial and all the rest of it. So what charismatic leadership does says, that's what the right wing people are saying. That's what the right wing press is saying. We're going to make it different this time, right? And the reason it is different is because people believe it will be different, right? They'll go, no, actually, assemblies can do this. We can get ordinary people involved, and they can, and it happens because they believe it is. In other words, they feel encouraged and they go out and do it. And the third thing is this critical moment when the assemblies, all come together. You've got this critical moment where they say, here's the pledge card, and the government says, piss off. That's the moment again for charismatic leadership. Someone stands up and says, we're not going to stand for this. And this could be someone who emerges, or some people who emerge from the assembly process, right? These are ordinary people, someone who used to be an electrician, and they stand up and go, well, I tell you what, I've just spent the last 2 months being involved in this process. If the government isn't going to do anything, then I tell you what, we're all going to go down to London and we're going to sit in Parliament Square for 3 days because, I'm over all the shit. And if you don't do it, I'm going to do it anyway. And so you've got someone who comes through that process, a charismatic person. But the design point here is that you proactively look for these charismatic people and then embed them, of course, within a control system, so they don't end up being really super weird or egotistic or Leninist or whatever, right? So again, it's a sophisticated design. But what's critical here is this is a new element, right? Which is absolutely critical in my view. In a sort of synergistic relationship with the other elements in the system. Okay, and this is supported by my friend Paul Engler. I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning him. So I've had a few chats with him. He wrote This Is an Uprising, which you might want to read. Very good book. There you are, just telling you that. Okay, but we had a good chat about the key elements in incubating movements, and he said, and I largely agree with him, is the two elements are charismatic leadership, prophetic leadership, as I think he calls it, and trigger events. In other words, you need someone who's driving that process forward. Like me on these podcasts, it's like, come on, guys, we can do this. Who's going to stand up and get a tingle going down people's spines. And then the other thing is the trigger event, right? You've got to go and cause disruption. There has to be direct action in the system. Someone has to go and, blockade a big parade and say, hello, we're here, and everyone hates it. But it gets that whole system going, as we've investigated in detail in previous episodes. So you can see this, in this last year, these two things are working together. They're working with your four armies. And the last element here is the international situation. People are doing, they're trying to work out this conundrum on how neutral the assemblies should be in lots of different countries. And they say, oh, maybe if you do this, it's better. And it is literally about the phrases you use and, where the tables are put and all the rest of it. All right, so I'm going to do the second problem then, which is a bit, this general problem, but I'll talk about specific sort of conundrum. So the general problem, as we've just established, is this centralisation, decentralisation, or centralisation, horizontalism problem. And you can see this working, in this very fraught idea of putting up candidates, because people are rightly suspicious. Are you going to get appropriated in the system? Are you going to turn into some useless, hopeless political party and such like? So what I've been working on, I'm not saying this is the last word in the matter, again, a sophisticated system that combines the two logics, right? The horizontalist logic is right. Hey guys, we don't want, some patriarchal male, egotistical leaders, we need to make decisions ourselves. Yeah, that's true as far as it goes. But at the same time, you've got the sort of Leninist hierarchical sort of model, which is this needs to be driven by a strategically intelligent and coherent central group, vanguard, and we know all the problems with that. But we also know, to get the Russian Revolution on the go, give the guy a bit of credit. Okay, so here's a design. So yes, you're probably familiar now, right? You're going to have these assemblies. So let's say you take an average Western city, you have 5 to 10 assemblies, depending on the size. At those assemblies, people are nominated to stand in the elections, the local elections or in the national elections. So you can either use sortition, or you're in your groups of 8 and they go, you have a little secret ballot and they say, oh, Joe's quite a cool guy, I'm going to vote for Joe. So everyone anonymously votes for someone that they've got to know. And then everyone then goes into a hustings process. So maybe you select 1 or 2 people from each assembly, and then there's 10 people, there's 8 people or 5 people, whatever, and they go to a bunch of hustings where they talk and people ask them questions, and then there's a direct debit in this open husting for the assembly, for the constituency election or for the council elections, and ordinary people then select other ordinary people. But this is where it gets interesting, I think, and these are my innovations in as much as no one else has thought of them. So the people who are going to stand for election, they take an oath in public. So they write it out, and it's all very cultural and got ritualistic elements, and maybe it's sort of funny. But the bottom line is they write saying, I promise to enact the will of the local assemblies. In other words, when they go into Parliament or the local council, they're going to say, I'm not here for myself. I'm here for the people of Birmingham, wherever. And they're going to do an assembly. So I'm going to tell you what they say. And if I don't agree with it, tough, doesn't matter. I'm going to be a conduit for their will, as it were. Okay, so then it raises the issue of the assemblies. So we're sort of moving down the line in terms of the design. So obviously these assemblies, once someone's elected to the council or to Parliament, they need to enact the will of assemblies which are organised. They need to be quality controlled. They can't be rubbish ones. And they need to be genuine reflections of local opinions. In other words, they need to be organised in a specific way. So then the question is, who ensures that they are designed in a special way? Well, your revolutionary sort of organisation, right? So this is working off what happened in Porto Alegre. The Workers' Party came to power. They instituted regional assemblies. But if the regional assemblies started getting infiltrated by the mafia or degenerate in numerous different ways, they'd disband the assembly and they'd start another one. In other words, it has to be held by a body which is in charge of making sure they're run well. And we all know that, there's a whole bunch of reasons, ways in which they can be held well or not held well. So then you've got the next question, which is, who controls the people who control the quality of the elections, right? So then arguably what you have is, you have your revolutionary organisation, but all the people that are members of that in the city of Birmingham, let's say, they create their 20 or 30 of those people are selected by sortition, so you don't get the corruption of self-selection. And the sortition council controls the body which controls the quality of the assemblies. So if they start getting corrupted, then you've got this assembly body. So this works a little bit like a board, in a normal company or charity. They're not hands-on, they're not operational, but if something weird happens, some abuse or some big conflict or some bad practice, they can intervene and they can oversee the selection of new people to that operational body. So again, as I said, the beginning of this, if you're interested in this, email me, because there's a whole bunch of details there, right? And they no doubt, will get changed around as different iterations of this work. But the point here isn't that whether this works perfectly or doesn't work perfectly. The point here is the beauty of design and iteration on design, right? So instead of just having this big abstract debate between horizontalism and Leninism or, vertical functional hierarchy, what you're saying is, okay, so let's come up with a smart design like they did in Porto Alegre. And it's somewhere in that ballpark where you optimize this other major problem, right? Which is maintaining the quality of that army, right? Your people who are going to stand in the elections so they don't get appropriated. So this is what you might call like maintenance of your armies, right? As they move into battle. And it's each stage that they move into battle, you need to have these maintenance mechanisms to make sure they don't degenerate and you keep morale and such like. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. But that's broadly what the year running up to it looks like, right? On the basis of all those other episodes. What we're going to look at in talk 2 of
this revolution chapter is we're going to look at the month, the month before the revolution, and then the week, right? This is all important stuff, and obviously this is the stuff of history. So that's what we're going to look at next time, and then we're going to go on to making sure it doesn't all collapse in a heap, you know, a week afterwards or a year afterwards, the revolution after the revolution. Okay, that's it. Thanks very much.